The Mafia boss celebrated his promotion until the black waitress leaned in and said, "Get out now." The evening began with the kind of glitter that made the entire restaurant hum with pride. A private room in the back had been transformed for a celebration, warm golden lights reflecting off polished wood and tall crystal glasses that had never known a single fingerprint. At the center of it all sat Vincent Moretti, the man who had survived more than 2 decades in a world built on danger and silence. Tonight was his moment. His employees filled the room with forced laughter, toasts, and the kind of admiration that came from fear rather than affection. A jazz trio played near the corner, and servers moved with the precision of dancers, but only one of them carried an unease that wrapped around her like a second skin. Her name was Alana. She was the only black waitress on the evening staff, a quiet woman who worked double shifts to keep her younger brother in school and her mother's rent paid on time. She had learned to fade into expensive spaces, to take insults with lowered eyes, and to live inside the thin line between dignity and survival. But on this night, the energy in the room did not feel right. She noticed 2 men at the far table wearing jackets too heavy for the mild weather, their eyes watching the exits more than the celebration. She noticed the way one of them adjusted something near his waist every few minutes. She noticed how the kitchen door swung open a little too wide, revealing a man she had never seen before, leaning close to the prep counter with an expression that did not belong in a room filled with celebration. Alana had seen danger before. She had grown up around it, survived it, learned to read its breathing. And now she felt it settling over the room like a storm that no one else could sense. When she approached Vincent Moretti's table with a fresh bottle of champagne, she felt her heartbeat thudding against her ribs. The guests around him were laughing loudly, celebrating his promotion within the organization, celebrating his rise to a level of power that few men ever reached. Vincent leaned back in his chair, pleased, confident, unaware of the tension gathering just beyond his line of sight. Alana stepped closer. The bottle trembled slightly in her hand. Vincent smiled politely, the way powerful men smiled at workers they barely noticed. But as she leaned in, her voice dropped into a whisper that did not belong in a room filled with celebration. She said, in a tone barely louder than breath, that urgent and trembling truth she knew he needed to hear. "Get out now." For a single moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Vincent Moretti did not breathe at first. The words from Alana's whisper still hung in the air between them, fragile and impossible, like something that did not belong in a room filled with music and rising laughter. He lifted his eyes slowly, as if turning his head too quickly might shatter the delicate silence that had settled around them. Alana kept her posture still, one hand gripping the neck of the champagne bottle, the other resting against her apron, as if she were simply standing there waiting for instructions. But her eyes told a different story. They held fear, real fear, the kind that came from instinct rather than imagination. Vincent had seen fear in many versions during his years in the world he commanded, but this was different. It was not selfish fear. It was warning. He leaned back an inch, closing the distance between them just enough to hear her next quiet breath. She did not speak again. Her jaw was tight, her pulse visible at the base of her neck. She was waiting to see if he understood. Vincent gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable, the kind of nod only someone watching him closely would detect. And she was watching him very closely. He reached for his glass, lifting it as if preparing for another toast. The table erupted with cheers at the gesture, believing it was another moment of triumph. No one sensed danger. No one sensed the storm tightening its grip around the room. Vincent stood. He moved slowly, deliberately, raising the glass high enough to make the nearest tables quiet down. Alana stepped back with trained smoothness, but her eyes never left him. He could feel her fear reach for him like a distant hand. He cleared his throat. The entire private room went silent. He was known for his presence, the gravity he carried even when he said nothing. People listened before they understood why. Vincent gazed around the room, studying the path to each exit, each window, each shadow. His mind sorted details faster than he could speak. He saw the 2 men Alana had noticed. Heavy jackets. Wrong season. Eyes that scanned rather than celebrated. He saw a 3rd man near the kitchen door, leaning in with a posture too alert to belong to a staff member. Vincent set the champagne glass down. He looked at his closest lieutenant seated 2 chairs away. a man named Donovan Pike, a former Marine who followed orders with exact precision. Vincent placed a hand briefly on the back of his chair. A quiet signal. An old signal. The kind no stranger could interpret. Donovan's spine straightened without turning his head. Vincent stepped away from the table with the calmness of someone who had made up his mind. He turned to the guests, all of them well-dressed and well-fed, unaware of the danger tightening around their celebration. His voice was steady. He thanked them for coming. He spoke about loyalty, the future, the privilege of trust. On the surface, it sounded like a leader honoring his supporters. But underneath every word was a coded message meant only for Donovan. Move now. Quietly. The quartet in the corner kept playing, unaware that the air had shifted. A soft saxophone line drifted through the room like a veil that kept everyone from noticing the truth. Donovan stood as if adjusting his jacket. He scanned the room with his own sharp eyes, confirming every threat Vincent had already calculated. Then he slipped away from the main floor without drawing attention. Vincent continued speaking with a calm he did not feel. He was waiting. He needed Donovan in position before he made any move that would alert the room. Alana remained 10 paces behind him, standing near the wall, still and focused, her hand gripping her serving towel so tightly that the fabric trembled. Her heart was pounding. Vincent could almost hear it across the space. When Donovan reappeared near the back hallway, he met Vincent's eyes and gave the slightest nod. Confirmation. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Vincent inhaled once, deeply, preparing to break the calm of the room. His voice dropped lower, directed only at his most trusted men. The air thickened, and in that heavy moment before the truth broke open, Vincent realized something he had never expected. The quiet waitress who had whispered to him had just saved his life. The room remained wrapped in a fragile quiet, the kind that felt stretched too thin, ready to snap at the smallest motion. Vincent Moretti stood at the center of it, a man pretending to celebrate, a man pretending not to notice the threat rising like a silent tide around him. His guests believed every word he spoke was about gratitude and triumph, but Alana knew better. She could see it in the subtle shift in his shoulders, the faint tension edging his jaw, the way his eyes measured every corner of the room with the precision of someone who had learned to survive by anticipating danger before it arrived. She remained close enough to watch him, far enough to pretend she was simply waiting for the next table request. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs, but her posture stayed firm and professional. She kept telling herself to breathe, but the fear inside her felt too dense to move. She had not imagined any part of this night ending in such a way. She had expected another double shift, another late bus ride, another quiet walk home where she checked over her shoulder every few blocks as she always did. She had not expected to whisper a warning to a Mafia boss. She had not expected him to believe her. Donovan Pike, the most trusted lieutenant, now positioned himself near the back hallway. His presence was quiet, but Alana could feel him watching everything. Vincent continued to speak for a few more seconds, filling the room with soft phrases about loyalty and appreciation. But then, as soon as he caught Donovan's confirming signal, he placed the mic gently on the table. That simple gesture was the first fracture in the evening's illusion. The jazz trio paused instinctively, confused by the sudden stillness. A few guests exchanged puzzled glances. The atmosphere shifted, almost imperceptibly, but Alana felt it like a cold brush of wind against her skin. Vincent did not raise his voice when he spoke next. He did not shout. He did not panic. He simply said, in a low tone that carried a strange weight, that the celebration would be moving to another room for a special surprise. His words were smooth, calm, perfectly crafted to guide the guests without alarming them. He motioned for his inner circle to stand. They rose with the kind of discipline that came from years of following commands without question. Alana swallowed hard. She could feel the danger pressing closer, even though no one else seemed to notice. The two men in heavy jackets stiffened when they saw Vincent moving. Their eyes flitted to each other. A silent exchange. Recognition. Something was unfolding faster than they planned. They shifted subtly, one adjusting his sleeve, the other tilting his head toward the kitchen hallway. Alana saw it. Donovan saw it. And Vincent definitely saw it. Vincent stepped back, intentionally placing himself between his guests and the suspicious men. His voice remained even. He urged everyone to move at a steady pace toward the side exit. He spoke as if the evening was still perfectly normal, as if the danger blooming at the edges of the room did not exist at all. But Alana knew every second mattered. Her breath tightened when she saw one of the suspicious men reach inside his jacket. Not fully, just enough for her to see the shift of fabric, the curve of something rigid beneath it. She felt her knees weaken. She pressed her hand to the serving tray to steady herself. Vincent's gaze followed the movement. For the first time that night, Alana saw a flicker of something sharp in his expression. Not fear, calculation, memory, readiness. He gave Donovan another silent order with a twitch of his wrist. Donovan moved instantly, adjusting his position just enough to block a potential line of fire. The rest of the room still believed they were simply transitioning to another part of the evening. People laughed lightly, confused but not concerned. They moved toward the exit with the lazy calm of party guests who had no idea that danger coiled inches from them. But Alana stayed rooted in place for a moment, unable to move, torn between her instinct to follow and her instinct to hide. Vincent turned slightly and caught her eyes across the room. Something in his expression steadied her. It was not kindness. It was not comfort. It was recognition, the kind that passed between two people who understood they were now bound by the same unfolding danger. He gave her the faintest nod, a single signal. Move. She forced her legs to respond, stepping into the slow stream of retreating guests. The room felt colder now, its glittering beauty drained of warmth. The danger was no longer a theory. It was here, alive, breathing, and following their every step. And as the last guests neared the door, one of the men in the heavy jacket took a deliberate step forward, changing everything in a single heartbeat. The moment the man in the heavy jacket stepped forward, the room's delicate balance snapped like a thin branch under too much weight. Vincent Moretti saw the shift in his posture before anyone else did. The quiet tension in the man's shoulders, the slight turn of his wrist, the subtle widening of his stance. Danger had stopped lurking in the background. Now it was standing in plain sight. Alana felt her breath lock in her chest as the man's hand slid deeper inside his jacket. She could see the outline beneath the fabric, the unmistakable shape of something metal, something that did not belong in a place filled with fine wine and celebration. Donovan Pike moved first. His steps were silent, measured, precise, the same steps he had learned in combat training years earlier. He angled his body between Vincent and the threat, turning his head just enough to communicate danger without uttering a single word. Vincent raised a hand, pretending to gesture for the guests to keep moving, but the intention was far different. It was a signal, sharp and unmistakable, meant for the few who knew how to read it. The suspicious man's hand tightened. His eyes darted toward the second man across the room. A silent agreement passed between them, a decision made without speaking. Alana saw it. Donovan saw it. Vincent saw it. The guests did not. A woman in a silver dress laughed softly, thinking the shift in the room was part of the evening's surprise. A man in a navy suit nudged his friend, making a joke about the sudden seriousness in Vincent's expression. They had no idea that the next few seconds held the weight of life and death. The first man took another step forward. Vincent's jaw tightened. His voice remained steady, but his words carried a strange undertone when he instructed the guests to continue moving toward the exit. His closest men understood the tone immediately. Two of them began guiding people faster, disguising urgency as courtesy. But Alana's focus was locked on the suspicious man. She felt the world narrowing into a single thread of awareness, a kind of instinct she had carried since childhood. She could tell when violence was about to erupt. She could feel its temperature. The room was heating by the second. Vincent shifted his weight, readying himself for whatever came next. His mind was calculating paths, outcomes, angles of escape, all within a fraction of a moment. The suspicious man glanced toward the kitchen hallway. That was when Alana saw the third stranger again, the one she had spotted earlier leaning near the prep counter. He was moving now, slipping closer to the door behind Vincent's table, his hand hidden behind his back. A triangle of danger was closing around them. Alana's heart pounded so hard it felt like a drum inside her ribs. Donovan caught sight of the third man and changed direction instantly, but he was too far to reach him before something terrible happened. Vincent spoke suddenly, his voice calm but powerful enough to slice through the rising tension. He addressed no one in particular, yet everyone heard him. He said that the evening's celebration would continue once they ensured the service staff had a moment to reset the room. It was a lie, but a strategic one. It pushed his closest allies into action without alerting the attackers that he had recognized their plan. One of the suspicious men hesitated. His eyes flickered. Uncertainty cracked the surface of his confidence. That hesitation saved a life. Donovan took advantage of it, moving faster than the man expected. He shifted the direction of the threat, forcing the suspicious man to adjust his stance. The motion disrupted the coordination between the attackers. The second suspicious man reached into his jacket faster, frustration sharpening his movements. Alana gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Vincent pivoted with the force of someone who had lived through far too many nights like this. He stepped forward just enough to shield the nearest guests, yet not enough to expose himself fully. Donovan shouted a single command, a word that ignited the room into chaotic motion. But underneath the chaos, Vincent's mind settled on one single, undeniable truth. The attack was no longer about the room or the guests or even his promotion. This was something targeted, personal, and deliberate. And the person who had warned him, the person who had sensed the danger, long before anyone else, was standing behind him with fear in her eyes and courage in her breath. Alana had saved him once already. Now the night was demanding more from both of them. The room erupted into motion, but to Vincent Moretti it all unfolded in a slow, deliberate haze, as if the night held its breath once more before releasing something irreversible. The suspicious man closest to the exit lunged first, shoving through the last line of unaware guests. His jacket flew open for a brief second, revealing the glint of metal beneath the inner lining. Donovan Pike reacted instantly, reaching for the man's arm, but the attacker twisted away with a sharp jerk that sent a nearby chair crashing to the floor. Screams rose in waves as guests finally understood that something was terribly wrong. Alana felt the shock run through her body like an electric pulse. She backed away instinctively, bumping into a tray table, sending forks and silver napkin rings scattering across the polished wood floor. Her hands shook, but she forced herself not to freeze. She scanned the room quickly, searching for danger, searching for Vincent, searching for any sign that she had not doomed them all by speaking too late. Vincent moved with startling calm, guiding a group of terrified guests toward the side exit with firm but controlled gestures. His eyes flicked toward the attackers every few seconds, reading their intentions, calculating their timing, preparing for whatever came next. Even in chaos, he carried a chilling steadiness, the kind that came from years spent navigating threats with calculation rather than blind panic. The second suspicious man had now pushed through a cluster of panicking guests, trying to reach a clear vantage point. His movements were erratic, fueled by frustration and desperation. He kept glancing toward the kitchen hallway where the third stranger had positioned himself earlier. They were trying to box Vincent in. Alana saw it clearly now. They were closing off his escape routes. They were not there for a random act of violence. They were there for one person, and one person only. She felt her heart drop into her stomach. They wanted Vincent Moretti. She swallowed hard as her gaze locked on the man near the kitchen hallway. His hand was still hidden behind his back. His eyes were locked on Vincent with a cold, unwavering focus. Alana's breath hitched. Something about his posture reminded her of the sort of stillness that came before an explosion. Then she saw it. A faint, unnatural bulge beneath the back of his shirt. Not shaped like a gun. Something different. Something heavier. A device. The realization struck her like a physical blow. Her chest tightened so severely she could barely breathe. She forced herself to speak, her voice cracking but carrying enough strength to reach Donovan. She said that the third man had something strapped beneath his clothing, and that it looked wrong. Donovan spun toward her, stunned that she had seen it before he had. He followed her gaze, his expression shifting from alertness to grim certainty. He shouted Vincent's name. The sound cut sharply through the chaos. Vincent turned, his attention snapping toward Donovan, then to the third man by the kitchen hallway. Everything in the room collapsed into a single line of danger. The attacker reached behind his back, pulling at a strap. It was the motion of someone preparing to activate something. Vincent reacted so quickly that even Alana barely saw the movement. He thrust the last group of guests toward the exit, barking an order that sent his men into immediate formation. Donovan charged toward the hallway, but he was too far to stop the attacker before the strap loosened. Alana's throat tightened in pure terror. She knew what she was seeing. She remembered warnings from news broadcasts. She remembered the image of a device strapped beneath clothing in a tragedy she never wanted to recall. Her knees trembled as she shouted the words that tore themselves out of her without thought. She told Vincent that the attacker was pulling at a trigger. Vincent spun around, locking onto Alana's terrified face, and for the briefest moment their eyes connected in a silent exchange. He did not question her. He did not hesitate. He acted on her voice as if it were truth carved into stone. He lunged toward her, grabbing her by the arm with a force born from desperation and instinct. He pulled her down, shielding her body with his own just as the attacker ripped the strap free. Alana squeezed her eyes shut, expecting the violent end of everything. But instead of an explosion, a loud metallic click echoed across the room, followed by a choked sound of frustration from the attacker. The device had jammed. For one suspended second, the world stood still, caught between disaster and survival. And in that suspended second, Vincent did not move from where he held Alana. His arm remained locked around her, his body shielding hers, his breath warm and uneven against her shoulder. She felt his grip tighten, not in fear, but in a silent vow that he was not going to let her fall. Not now. Not after she had saved him twice in a single night. The metallic click echoed through the room like a warning that fate had paused for one final breath. Vincent Moretti kept his body over Alana, shielding her with a protective intensity that made the world around them fall silent. Her eyes were wide, her breath shaking, but she felt the steadiness of his arm around her. It anchored her in a moment that could have been the end of everything. The attacker let out a frustrated curse, ripping again at the device that had jammed. Donovan Pike saw the opening and charged with the full force of a man who had spent his life running toward danger rather than away from it. He tackled the attacker with brutal precision, slamming him against the wall before the man could recover. The device clattered to the ground, rolling across the floor until it hit the leg of a table and stopped. The second suspicious man saw the downfall of their plan and lunged toward the device, but two of Vincent's men intercepted him before he could take another step. They pinned him to the ground with the efficiency of men who had done this before and understood exactly what was at stake. The first attacker continued to struggle beneath Donovan, thrashing wildly, but Donovan held him in a chokehold until the man's resistance began to fade. The room filled with chaotic sounds, the echoes of fear, frantic breaths, and desperate attempts to regain control. But beneath all of this noise, Vincent and Alana remained locked in a strange, suspended stillness. He did not move from where he shielded her. He only lifted his head slightly, scanning the room in a slow sweep to ensure there were no more threats waiting in the shadows. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. He told her that she needed to stay on the ground until he said otherwise. She nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle into her chest. Slowly, Vincent stood and pulled her to her feet with one steady hand. She felt the tremor in her legs, the lingering shock making it difficult to stand on her own, but he kept his hand on her arm for a moment longer than necessary. It was a silent reassurance, a confirmation that he saw her, that he understood the fear still pulsing through her. The guests had all fled through the exit by now, leaving behind overturned chairs, abandoned drinks, and the lingering echo of their panic. The private room, once filled with warmth and celebration, now felt cold and hollow. Vincent surveyed the aftermath with a slow, assessing gaze. The attackers had been subdued. His men had secured the device. Donovan was barking quiet orders, calling for reinforcements, and making sure the rest of the building was cleared. Alana stood near Vincent, her breath shallow and uneven. Her eyes followed the attackers as they were dragged to the far end of the room. She had never imagined herself in the middle of something like this. She had never expected her instincts to become the difference between life and death. Vincent turned to her, his expression unreadable. He studied her face in complete silence, as if trying to understand the kind of courage that lived beneath her fear. Then he said her name for the first time. Hearing her own name in his voice made her chest tighten. It felt like he was acknowledging her in a way he had never acknowledged any staff member before. He asked her how she knew. His tone was not accusatory. It was something else, something softer and layered with a quiet respect. Alana swallowed hard and explained that she had noticed the bulge under the attacker's shirt, the weight of it, the way he guarded it with his posture. She had seen something similar once in a news story about a tragedy that had stayed with her. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but the truth in her words never wavered. Vincent listened without interrupting, absorbing every detail. When she finished, he nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. It was not approval. It was recognition. He told her that her instincts had saved dozens of lives. He told her that if she had not warned him, the entire room would have been destroyed before anyone understood what was happening. Alana felt her throat tighten with emotion she tried hard to hide. She had spent years being invisible, overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. And now, in this moment, a powerful man was looking at her with something close to gratitude, something close to respect. Vincent looked toward the exit where the last of the shaken guests had disappeared, then back at Alana. His voice dropped to a murmur. He said that the night was not over yet, and that danger still circled the edges of the building like a storm refusing to pass. Then he told her something that made her breath stop for a moment. He said she needed to stay close to him, very close, because the people who had come for him would not give up so easily, and because she had already become part of the story in a way that could not be undone. Alana felt the weight of Vincent Moretti's words settle over her like a heavy cloak. Stay close. The warning carried more than caution. It carried danger she could not see yet, danger that lingered just beyond the shattered quiet of the private room. The attackers had been restrained, the device secured, the guests evacuated, yet the air still held an unease that pressed against her skin. Vincent's eyes moved constantly, scanning shadows, corners, reflections in the hanging glass fixtures. He was a man who had lived through too many betrayals to trust an ending that came too easily. Donovan Pike kept one attacker pinned to the floor, while two other men bound his wrists with plastic ties. Another team secured the second attacker near the exit. The third man, the one with the device, lay face down beneath Donovan's grip, his breath ragged, his face pressed against the polished floor. Reinforcements were on their way, called in through discreet channels that did not involve the authorities. Vincent had made that clear. This was not a situation to expose to police or reporters. This was a message, one sent directly to him, and he intended to answer it in his own way. Alana stood near him, trying to steady her shaking hands by pressing them against her apron. But the tremor would not stop. Everything in her life until this night had taught her to stay small, stay quiet, stay unnoticed. Now she had been thrust into a storm that was not hers, a storm she never wanted, yet somehow felt responsible for predicting. Vincent glanced at her again, and for the briefest moment, she saw something unspoken in his expression. It was not softness. It was not warmth. It was recognition, the kind that saw more in her than she ever allowed others to see. Before she could look away, a sudden crash echoed from the far corner of the room. A framed painting had fallen, struck by an unseen force or vibration. Everyone tensed. Donovan drew his weapon. The remaining guards raised their voices, calling out to check the perimeter. Vincent moved in front of Alana without even realizing he had done it, positioning himself as a barrier between her and the unknown. She did not miss the instinctive nature of the gesture. He scanned the ceiling next, then the lighting fixtures, then the ventilation grates. His voice dropped to a low murmur, addressing Donovan without taking his eyes off the shadows. He said that the attackers were too confident. They had come in coordinated positions. They had brought a device meant to cause maximum damage. They were not amateurs, and they certainly did not come without a plan for failure. Donovan agreed. They had expected chaos. They had expected panic. They had expected Vincent to be caught off guard during a moment of celebration. But something in the room did not match that expectation. Something was missing. Alana did not fully understand the coded exchange, but her instincts tugged at her with a sense of dread. She followed Vincent's gaze as he studied each unconscious or restrained attacker as if the answer might be written on their faces. Then his eyes narrowed. He stepped closer to the man Donovan held down, tilting his head slightly, as if listening to a silent echo. He asked Donovan a single question. He asked if anyone had checked the attackers for communication devices. Donovan lifted the man's jacket, patting down pockets, sleeves, waistband. Nothing. He checked the second attacker. Nothing. He checked the third. At first nothing. But then, when he lifted the man by the collar to shift his weight, something slipped out from beneath the lining of the man's shirt. A small, nearly invisible earpiece. The kind used by coordinated teams. Alana felt her breath catch. Vincent's expression hardened, his eyes going cold as stone. If the attackers had been receiving instructions, then whoever sent them was still listening, still watching, still waiting. A chill ran through Alana's spine. The thought felt like a hand closing around her heart. The danger was not over. The room was not safe. And she realized with sudden clarity that the warning she whispered at the start of the night had only been the first truth she needed to speak. Her voice trembled as she turned to Vincent, but the fear did not silence her this time. She told him that the attackers had not come alone. Someone else was here. Someone closer than they thought. And the moment the words left her mouth, a soft click sounded from the service hallway behind them, as if someone had just opened a door they had not noticed before. The soft click from the service hallway cut through the room like a thin blade sliding between ribs. Every head turned toward the darkened corridor, the single strip of fluorescent light flickering above it casting uneven shadows across the floor. Vincent Moretti stilled, every muscle in his body tightening, his eyes sharp and alert. His men froze in place, their weapons angled but not raised, waiting for his command. Alana felt the air thicken, her breath catching in her throat as she stepped instinctively closer to Vincent. She did not know what waited beyond that doorway, but her instincts screamed that whatever had entered the building had been watching them long before they realized it. Vincent lifted one hand slightly, signaling his men to hold their positions. Donovan Pike moved with the caution of someone who had walked into ambushes before, stepping toward the hallway with slow, careful strides. The restrained attackers on the floor stirred weakly, their eyes flickering open as if they sensed their plan was no longer unfolding as intended. One of them smirked, a small, sinister curl of the lips that sent a shiver down Alana's spine. He knew something they did not. Donovan reached the doorway. He paused, peering into the dim corridor. Then he turned his head slightly, his voice low but steady. He said that the hallway was not empty. Someone was standing near the back. Vincent stepped forward, placing himself between Alana and the growing threat. She felt the heat of his presence, the steadiness of a man who had survived too many nights like this one to show fear now. The silence stretched thin until a single figure stepped out of the darkness. A man in a dark suit, tall and broad-shouldered, with a calmness in his posture that did not match the chaos in the room. He walked with the confidence of someone who did not fear consequences, someone who believed he controlled the outcome of the night. His face came into view beneath the flickering light. Sharp jawline, cold eyes, a faint scar across his temple. Vincent inhaled slowly, recognition settling over him like a heavy weight. He knew this man, not a friend, not an associate, a rival with a reputation for orchestrating violence without lifting a finger. The man stopped several feet away from the group, his hands visible at his sides, an almost mocking display of surrender. He looked around the room, taking in the toppled chairs, the fallen painting, the subdued attackers, and finally the device lying on the floor near the table leg. When his gaze returned to Vincent, he smiled. It was the smile of someone who enjoyed watching others unravel. Vincent's voice was cold when he asked why the man had come himself instead of sending more expendable soldiers. The stranger answered with a tone too casual for the situation. He said that certain messages deserved a personal touch. He said that Vincent's promotion had disrupted plans far bigger than he realized. He said tonight had been meant to remove him quietly, without spectacle, without survivors, without anyone left to question the future of the organization. Alana felt her stomach twist. This was not random. This was not impulsive. This was a carefully designed execution disguised as a celebration. The stranger's eyes drifted to her then, and something in his gaze made her skin prickle. He asked her if she was the one who warned Vincent. The room tightened around her. Vincent stepped in front of her without a second thought, blocking the man's view of her entirely. His voice dropped to a low growl, telling the stranger that she was not part of this world and would not be touched. The stranger lifted an eyebrow, as if amused by the protectiveness. He said that she had become part of the story the moment she interfered. Vincent's jaw tightened. Donovan shifted his stance. The entire room seemed to hold itself at the edge of an unseen cliff. Then, the stranger casually slipped a small object from his jacket pocket and held it up between his fingers. It was no larger than a thumb, black and sleek, with a faint blinking red light. Alana's heart pounded painfully. Vincent's voice hardened as he demanded to know what the device controlled. The stranger smiled again, a cold, confident smile. He said that the first device had been nothing but a distraction, a test to see how quickly Vincent would react. Then he said the real device had been planted somewhere far more important, somewhere that would ensure Vincent watched everything he valued collapse in front of him. Alana felt the room spin. The stranger's final words landed like a blow. He said the real device was hidden in the restaurant's lower storage level, exactly beneath the private room where everyone had been standing minutes earlier. And his thumb hovered over the blinking light, as if he could end everything with a single careless motion. The blinking red light on the small device cast a faint reflection against the stranger's fingers, each pulse steady and deliberate, like a countdown only he could hear. The room seemed to shrink around that tiny light, the air tightening until every breath felt thinner, sharper. Vincent Moretti did not move. His face remained unreadable, carved from discipline and experience, but Alana could see the tension gathering at the corners of his eyes. He understood the danger immediately. If there was a device beneath the floor, one that had been planted long before the attackers walked into the restaurant, then this entire confrontation had been nothing more than a staged distraction. The real threat was below them. The stranger's voice held a smug calm as he explained that the lower storage level was not reinforced, that the foundation beneath this part of the building was old, and that a single detonation at the right place could bring down the private room with devastating force. He said that Vincent would never survive it. Then his eyes drifted toward Alana again, and he added that she would not either. Vincent stepped closer to the stranger, his posture shifting from caution to something colder, something fierce. He said the stranger had already lost, that his men were restrained, and that no one was leaving until every remaining threat was uncovered. But the stranger only smiled, tilting the device in his hand like a toy he controlled with perfect confidence. He said that every man in the room could die trying to stop him, or they could accept that he was the only one who knew how to deactivate the real device. Donovan Pike took a step forward, his voice steady but tight as he demanded to know how the stranger had gotten inside the building unnoticed. The man answered without hesitation. He said he had been in the basement long before the celebration began, moving through service corridors that few people even remembered existed. He said he watched as staff prepared the private room, watched as Alana moved from table to table, watched as the guests arrived in their finest clothes. Then he looked directly at her once more. He said he had been waiting for the right moment to act, and that her interference had forced him to reveal himself sooner than planned. Alana felt a chill crawl across her skin, the weight of his gaze making her want to step back, but Vincent did not allow her to. He kept himself positioned between her and the stranger, making it clear that she was no longer a target within reach. The stranger continued speaking with unsettling calm. He said that the real device was on a timer, synchronized with the earpiece the attackers wore, and that once the signal was lost, the countdown continued on its own. He lifted the small device slightly and explained that the blinking red light indicated that he still had control, but once it turned steady, the detonation would be inevitable. Alana's heart pounded painfully. She looked down at the floor, imagining what lay beneath. A basement filled with old crates, metal shelving, cleaning supplies, possibly gas lines. She pictured what an explosion could do. The shockwave, the fire, the collapse. She swallowed hard, tears stinging the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Vincent shifted slightly, angling his body as if preparing to move. His eyes had narrowed, calculating, measuring distance and timing and risk. Donovan recognized the look instantly. He whispered a warning to Vincent, telling him that the stranger was waiting for exactly that kind of reaction, that he wanted Vincent to make a reckless move. But Vincent did not respond. His silence was heavier than any words he could have spoken. The stranger sighed dramatically, as though bored with the anticipation. He said he would give Vincent one chance to walk away from his position, resign his title, and surrender control of his organization. If Vincent refused, he would watch everything fall. Alana could feel the tension rising like a storm. She whispered Vincent's name softly, barely audible, but he heard it. His eyes flicked toward her for a brief second, and in that second she saw something in him she had not seen before. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was resolve. The stranger noticed the exchange and smirked, lowering his thumb toward the blinking light, ready to end the night on his terms. But before he could finish the motion, a sudden sound cracked through the room. Not an attack, not a weapon, a quiet, unexpected noise from the floor itself. It was the muffled echo of movement from beneath the building, a shifting vibration that made the glasses on the nearest table tremble. The stranger's smile faltered. Donovan's eyes widened. Vincent's expression changed instantly. Someone else was in the basement. Someone the stranger had not expected. And the realization unsettled him more than anything Vincent had said. The blinking light continued to pulse, steady and merciless, as the room absorbed the truth. They were not alone in the dark beneath them. The faint vibration rising from the floor made the entire room fall into a deeper stillness, a stillness that pulsed with uncertainty and fear. The stranger's confident smirk flickered for the first time, his eyes narrowing as he glanced downward, trying to understand what he had just heard. Vincent Moretti noticed the shift immediately. It was small, nearly invisible, but it revealed something important. The stranger did not know who or what was beneath them. Donovan Pike lifted his chin slightly, listening again, his expression tightening as a second, softer tremor drifted through the wood panels beneath their feet. It was not the sound of a timed device. It was not the sound of machinery. It was the steady, deliberate movement of a person walking across the lower storage level. A person who was not supposed to be there. Alana felt her breath catch in her throat. For a moment she wondered if another attacker had been hiding below, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But something about the rhythm of the footsteps did not feel like an ambush. They were too controlled, too measured, almost purposeful. Vincent took a single calculated step toward the stranger, watching him with a sharp, unblinking intensity. He demanded to know if the stranger had brought reinforcements. The man shook his head, his calm exterior beginning to fracture. He insisted that the operation had been precise, that no one else had been sent, that everything had been mapped and rehearsed. But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He was unsure. For the first time, he was no longer certain he controlled the night. Donovan gestured for two guards to move toward the stairwell that led to the lower level. They moved quietly, guns drawn, their footsteps slow and deliberate as they descended into the dim corridor. The air seemed to thicken as everyone waited for the next sound, the next sign, the next threat. Alana clutched the edge of a chair, her palms damp, her pulse racing. She had already witnessed enough danger for a lifetime, yet she could not turn away. Something inside her forced her to stay alert, to listen, to feel every shift of the room. Vincent's eyes remained fixed on the stranger, searching for any sign of deception, any indication that the man knew more than he claimed. The stranger's fingers tightened slightly around the small device, his thumb hovering over the blinking red light, as if he might press it out of pure panic. Vincent saw the motion and spoke again, his voice low but unmistakably firm. He warned the stranger that if he pressed the trigger, he would not live long enough to see the aftermath. The stranger hesitated. That single hesitation revealed the truth. He was no longer certain the device would obey him. He was no longer certain he controlled the explosion at all. A sudden burst of static crackled from the earpiece recovered from the first attacker. It was faint but audible, a garbled message filled with interference. One of Vincent's men turned the earpiece over in his hand, adjusting the angle until the static sharpened. A distorted voice leaked through, the tone strained and urgent. It repeated the same words several times, though barely half the sentence was clear. Alana strained to listen. The message said that the package had been moved. The package was no longer where the stranger believed it was. The stranger's face drained of color. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the earpiece, but Donovan pushed him back with a forceful shove. Vincent's eyes burned with realization. Someone had found the device before the attackers had reached the upper level. Someone had moved it. Someone had likely prevented the explosion from unfolding exactly as planned. The footsteps beneath the floor grew louder, now directly beneath the private room. Then they stopped. The silence that followed felt colder than the winter wind outside. Every person in the room turned toward the stairwell at once, waiting for whoever was below to finally reveal themselves. The stranger clenched his fists, his voice cracking with rising fear as he demanded to know who had interfered. Vincent did not answer. His eyes had shifted toward the stairwell, filled with a focus that Alana had only seen in the deepest moments of danger. A shadow moved at the bottom of the steps. Slow, steady, controlled. A lone figure began to climb, each step deliberate, each movement confident. Alana held her breath. The stranger backed away. Donovan tightened his grip on his weapon. Vincent stood perfectly still as the figure approached the top step. And when the face finally emerged into the light, the entire room froze, because the person standing there was someone none of them expected, someone who should not have been able to bypass every threat and remove the device without being noticed. Someone who had just changed the direction of the night entirely. I will now continue the story exactly as you requested, keeping every rule intact, maintaining continuity, and delivering one unified block of voiceover-friendly narration. The figure who emerged from the stairwell stepped fully into the light, and the entire room reacted as if the air itself had been struck. The man was older, with graying hair at his temples and a calm, weathered face that carried the confidence of someone who had survived more storms than he cared to count. His clothes were simple, a dark maintenance uniform with a name patch that had begun to fray at the edges. He looked like an ordinary employee, a man who cleaned floors and fixed pipes, a man no one noticed when he walked through the restaurant halls. Yet at this moment, every eye locked on him. Even Vincent Moretti straightened with quiet surprise. The stranger who held the trigger device was the most shocked of all. His expression twisted in confusion, then anger, then something dangerously close to fear. He demanded to know how the old man had gotten into the lower storage level. The maintenance worker did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and carefully pulled out a metal box no larger than a lunch container. Its surface was dented, smeared with dust, and secured with strips of electrical tape that looked recently applied. The room inhaled sharply. It was the real device, the one meant to collapse the upper floor. The stranger stepped back, disbelief filling his features as he shouted that the worker should not have been able to find it, that it had been hidden beneath a locked panel only someone with technical expertise could access. The worker finally spoke, his voice steady and deep, carrying the confidence of a man who knew buildings the way sailors knew the sea. He explained that he had worked in the restaurant for more than 20 years, long before Vincent ever took control, long before renovations changed the layout. He said he knew every forgotten service passage, every unstable panel, every section of the foundation that creaked with age. He said he heard the attackers moving earlier in the evening, heard them shifting crates, heard them forcing open a panel that should never have been touched. He remembered the exact sound because it did not belong in a night that had begun quietly. So he had gone to check. And when he found the device hidden beneath a series of stacked boxes, he had disabled the primary charge using nothing more than a wire cutter he carried on his belt. Alana stared at him, stunned. The man looked simple, almost fragile, but his calm confidence told a different story. Vincent studied him with an intensity that carried a quiet respect. The stranger's hand trembled slightly as he pointed the trigger device toward the worker, rage rising in every line of his face. He screamed that the device should not have been defeatable without specialized equipment, that no ordinary maintenance worker could possibly understand how to disable it. The worker shrugged. He said he had 5 children at home, and when a man had that many mouths to feed, he learned to fix anything that threatened the safety of his workplace. He said that this restaurant was not just a job for him. It was the place that kept food on his table, the place that helped him raise his family, the place where he had spent half of his life making sure others felt safe and comfortable. He said he would not let anyone destroy it. Alana felt her eyes sting with quiet emotion. She recognized that tone, that unwavering sense of duty, the voice of someone who kept going even when the world ignored him. It reminded her of the nights she worked double shifts, the nights she walked home in the cold, the nights she prayed that all her sacrifices meant something. The stranger's frustration peaked. He stepped forward, shouting that the worker had no idea what he had interfered with. Vincent responded before the stranger could take another step. His voice was cold, firm, and absolute. He said the stranger had miscalculated everything. He said the attack had relied on fear, secrecy, and control. But he said the stranger had forgotten one important truth. He said that the people who worked in the shadows of the city were the ones who understood its bones better than anyone. They were the ones who saw danger first. They were the ones who saved lives while others looked away. Vincent's gaze shifted briefly toward Alana. And in that moment, she understood the meaning behind his words. The night had not been saved by power or wealth. It had been saved by the people no one noticed. The maintenance worker lifted the disabled device slightly, as if proving the truth of Vincent's statement. And as the stranger realized everything he had planned was collapsing, the fear in his eyes turned into something darker, something desperate. He tightened his grip on the trigger device, ready to take his final chance. And the room braced itself for the decision that would decide the fate of everyone inside. The stranger's grip tightened around the trigger device until his knuckles turned pale, his thumb hovering over the blinking red light, as if it were the only lifeline left in a plan that had already shattered. The room seemed to contract around him, every breath suspended, every pair of eyes fixed on the tiny object that held the power to decide who lived and who did not. Vincent Moretti did not flinch. He stepped forward with the controlled steadiness of a man who had walked through danger his entire life, the kind of man who understood that panic was nothing but an invitation for disaster. Alana watched him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might give away her fear, but Vincent's presence held her still, grounding her like a hand pressed firmly against her back. Donovan Pike shifted his stance, ready to strike, but he waited for Vincent's signal. The maintenance worker held the disabled metal box with both hands, never lowering it, never letting the stranger forget that his masterpiece had been undone by someone he considered insignificant. That simple truth had enraged him more than the loss of power itself. The stranger's voice cracked with desperation as he shouted that he would detonate the device unless they all stepped aside, unless Vincent surrendered, unless this night ended on his terms. Vincent shook his head slowly, a gesture of cold finality. He told the stranger that even if he pressed the trigger, nothing would happen. He said the worker had already dismantled the core wiring, that the only threat left was the one the stranger held in his trembling hands. The stranger's face twisted in disbelief. He insisted that the trigger still controlled something, that pressing it would still ignite the explosives he had planted below. But the maintenance worker stepped forward, his voice calm and firm. He explained that the device had been synchronized through the earpieces, and once the attackers were subdued, the synchronization failed. The trigger device no longer carried a live signal. It was nothing but a blinking piece of plastic now, a broken key to a locked door. The stranger refused to believe it. His thumb pressed down, hard, his jaw tightening in frantic hope. The blinking light paused, then shifted from red to solid white. A low beep echoed in the room. Everyone held their breath. Nothing happened. The stranger pressed again. Nothing. He pressed again, his breath turning wild and uneven. But the light only blinked back at him, mocking him quietly with its useless glow. Vincent exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing but not disappearing. He said the words the stranger had not been ready to hear. He told him the night was over. Alana felt a wave of relief wash through her body, her knees weakening as the truth sank in. The danger had passed. The threat beneath their feet had been disarmed. The stranger had lost. But Donovan was already moving. With 3 long strides he reached the stranger, seizing his wrist in a vice grip and forcing the trigger device from his hand. The stranger resisted, shouting in rage as he kicked and twisted, but Donovan's strength overpowered him easily. In seconds the man was pinned to the ground, his arms restrained behind him, his fury pouring out in incoherent shouts. Vincent approached him with slow, deliberate steps. His expression was unreadable, carved from authority and hard-earned discipline. He knelt down beside the stranger and spoke softly enough that only those closest could hear. He told him that power built on fear was always destined to collapse, because fear broke faster than it could be controlled. The stranger glared at him, hatred burning in his eyes, but Vincent did not look away. He told him that tonight he had been defeated not by force, not by wealth, but by the courage of people the stranger never even bothered to see. Vincent stood and turned toward Alana. His gaze held hers with a depth that made her breath catch. She had no idea how she had ended up at the center of a storm meant for powerful men, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had refused to look away. She had refused to stay silent. And because of that, countless lives had been saved. The maintenance worker stepped beside her, quietly placing the disabled box on a nearby table. His hands trembled slightly now that the danger had fully passed. He looked at Alana with gentle, knowing eyes. He told her that people like them, The unseen ones were often the first to notice when something was wrong, because being overlooked forced them to pay attention to everything. Alana felt a strange warmth in her chest, a feeling she had never known in all her years working unnoticed in the restaurant's shadows. Vincent looked at both of them, the maintenance worker and the waitress, the two people who had saved his life, his guests, and the foundation of the restaurant. And for the first time that night, the hard lines of his expression softened. He told them the truth with a quiet intensity that made the entire room fall still. He said that courage did not belong to the powerful. He said it belonged to those who stood up when fear demanded they kneel. And in the silence that followed, something within Vincent Moretti changed in a way that everyone in the room could feel. The restaurant fell into a deep and fragile quiet, the kind that only settles after danger has passed, but fear has not yet left the room. The restrained attackers lay motionless on the floor. The disabled metal box sat on the table like a relic of the night's narrow escape, and the faint smell of spilled wine mixed with dust from the fallen painting. Yet in the center of all of it stood three people who had not begun the night as a team, but who now shared something unbreakable. Vincent Moretti looked at Alana with an expression that held none of the cold distance he once carried toward the staff. His eyes had changed, softened, seeing her clearly for the first time, not as a waitress, not as someone who lived in the background of wealthy people's lives, but as the person who had saved him long before she even understood the depth of the danger around them. Alana felt the intensity of his gaze and looked down, unsure how to hold the weight of this moment. She had been invisible for so long that being seen felt almost overwhelming. Yet she lifted her head again, steadying herself, because she knew this moment was not about fear. It was about dignity. The maintenance worker stood quietly beside them, his hands still trembling slightly, but his posture straight. He had not asked for recognition, and he did not want it. His calm was the calm of someone who had spent years doing the right thing without applause. Vincent approached him first. He thanked him with a sincerity that made the older man blink, as if unsure how to respond to such unguarded respect from someone like Vincent Moretti. Vincent told him that he had saved everyone in the building, and that such courage could not be forgotten. Then he turned toward Alana. The room seemed to hush itself in anticipation. Even Donovan, who had been giving orders just moments earlier, paused. Vincent stepped closer to her and spoke in a voice quiet enough to feel personal, yet strong enough for everyone to hear. He said that she had shown more courage in a single night than most men ever found in their entire lives. He said that she had risked everything without hesitation, even when she could have walked away, even when she could have chosen silence. Alana felt her breath tremble. She did not know what to say, so she simply stood there, letting his words settle into the spaces of her heart that had never known such affirmation. Vincent continued. He said that the people who saved the night were the ones everyone else often overlooked. The ones who carried the weight of the world in silence. The ones who saw danger before anyone else even noticed the shadows. His voice carried the softest shift, a kind of reverence she had never heard from him before. And then, to the shock of everyone in the room, Vincent Moretti bowed his head slightly to her. Not out of obligation, not out of performance, out of respect. A respect she had earned through her courage, her instincts, and her quiet refusal to let fear swallow her. The room went still. Donovan's eyes widened. The maintenance worker nodded with quiet approval. Alana felt warmth rise behind her eyes, but she held her tears back with the dignity she had fought so hard to keep intact. Vincent straightened again, and his voice returned to its low, steady power. He told his men to escort the attackers out, to secure the building, and to alert the staff that the danger had passed. They obeyed immediately, moving with purpose and relief. But Vincent did not move from where he stood. He looked at the disabled metal box one more time, then at the stairwell, then finally back at Alana. He said that the night had taught him something he should have learned long ago. That strength did not always come from power. That protection did not always come from force. And that sometimes the people who saved your life were the ones you least expected. Alana felt a long breath leave her chest, her fear finally unraveling from her body. She looked at him with gratitude, with disbelief, and with a quiet pride she had kept buried for years. The maintenance worker placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Donovan approached slowly, his expression solemn. He thanked her as well, saying that very few people had the instincts she showed that night. She nodded, unsure how to carry the weight of such praise, but knowing that she had earned every word. Vincent took one last step toward her, his voice gentle but sure. He told her that she would never again be unseen, never again be dismissed, never again be overlooked. And in that final moment, as the broken room settled into fragile peace, a single truth echoed through the silence like a quiet verdict on the night. That day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.